The bishop had already left our farmhouse when my father told me. I was kneading bread at the kitchen counter, flour up to my elbows, and he said it the way you'd announce the weather. Eli Stoltzfus would be a good husband. The wedding would be in November. I was 17 years old, and I had spoken to Eli exactly 4 times in my entire life. The dough went sticky under my hands because I had stopped moving. My mother didn't look up from the stove. My younger sister Rebecca froze with a jar of preserves halfway to the shelf. And I stood there with flour on my dress, listening to the clock on the wall, realizing that the rest of my life had just been decided in a conversation I wasn't even invited to. Before I tell you what I did on my wedding night, the thing I have never told anyone, not my therapist, not the few English friends who know my story, not even the man who eventually became my real husband years later. I need you to understand who I am. My name is Hannah, and this is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where I share the stories we were never allowed to speak out loud. I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and everything I'm about to tell you happened in a farmhouse less than 40 miles from where you might have driven, through on vacation, smiling at the buggies, never knowing what was happening behind those plain white walls. If this kind of truth matters to you, please hit that subscribe button, tap the like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Now, let me tell you what people don't understand about Amish marriage, especially in the more conservative church districts. Officially, our community will tell you that Amish marriages are not arranged. Officially, young people choose each other through the singings, through the buggy rides home, through the slow, careful courtship I have described in other videos. And for many couples, that is true. But there is another version of marriage that happens in our world, and nobody talks about it on the tourist tours. It happens when a girl turns 17 and her family has too many daughters and not enough land. It happens when a bishop quietly suggests a match to 2 sets of parents over coffee. It happens when a boy from a respected family expresses interest, and a girl's father says yes before she has even been told. It is not arranged in the formal sense. There is no contract, no dowry written down. But when the parents agree, when the bishop nods, when the community begins to expect it, the girl's choice becomes a kind of fiction. You can say no, technically. You can refuse, technically. But refusing means shaming your father, embarrassing your family, becoming the girl who thought she knew better than her parents and the bishop. In a community where your entire life, your housing, your food, your social world, your salvation depends on belonging, that kind of refusal is almost impossible. Eli was 24. He had a 90-acre farm waiting for him from his uncle, who had no sons. He needed a wife to make the farm work, to bear children, to cook for the harvest crews. I needed, according to my father, a stable man with land and a future. The fact that I had wanted to wait, that I had imagined courting a boy named Samuel from the next district who made me laugh during fellowship meals, none of that was discussed. None of that was relevant. My father had decided. My mother had agreed. The bishop had blessed it. And I, 17 years old with flour on my hands, was expected to be grateful. Stay with me, because the part about my wedding night, what I actually did when the door closed and the lamp was lit, is something I have carried alone for a long time, and I'm finally going to say it. The 4 months between the announcement and the wedding passed like I was watching someone else's life. I sewed my own wedding dress in the traditional dark blue, my fingers moving while my mind went somewhere far away. I helped my mother plan the meal for 280 guests. I sat in the front room twice with Eli and our parents, drinking coffee and talking about cows and weather, and the new addition his uncle was building on the Dottie house. He was not unkind. That is what I want to say first. He was not cruel. He was a quiet, serious young man with sun-darkened hands and careful eyes, and when he looked at me, I could tell he was trying. He would ask me about my garden. He would ask me what hymns I liked best. He was doing his part of the script. The problem was not Eli. The problem was that I did not know him. The problem was that when I tried to picture spending the next 60 years in a bed beside him, raising his children, washing his clothes, growing old in a kitchen he had built, my chest would tighten until I could not breathe. The problem was that I had never been asked. I went through bundling with him exactly twice during our courtship, both times in my parents' house, both times fully clothed, both times so silent and stiff that we might have been two strangers waiting for a train. He held my hand once. I let him. My hand felt like it belonged to someone else. If this story is hitting somewhere uncomfortable, if you are recognizing something in your own life or in a friend's life, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. It tells the algorithm to share these stories with other women who need to hear them, and that matters more than you know. Now let me tell you about the wedding day itself, because this is where the truth begins to sharpen. The morning of my wedding, I woke at 4 a.m. and threw up in the chamber pot beside my bed. My mother heard me and came in with a damp cloth. She wiped my forehead and said, "Every bride feels this way, Hannah. It will pass." And she meant it kindly. She did. But I looked at her in the dim light of that single candle, and I realized she had no idea what I was actually feeling, because feelings like mine were not allowed to exist in our world. There was no language for "I do not want to do this." There was only obedience or disgrace. The ceremony lasted 3.5 hours. The bishop preached on the duties of a wife from Ephesians. I sat on the hard bench in my new blue dress with my hands folded, and I made my vows in front of God and 280 people, and my voice did not shake because I had learned by then how to make my voice do what was required of it while my real self stood somewhere behind my eyes, watching. The meal, the visiting, the singing, the long afternoon, all of it passed. Guests stayed late. My new mother-in-law hugged me and called me daughter. My father shook Eli's hand for a long time, and then the sun went down, and the relatives who had traveled far began settling into the upstairs rooms of my parents' house, because Amish weddings continue past the wedding. Night. The bride does not leave her parents' home immediately. We would stay there for another day, then visit relatives for weeks before finally moving to Eli's farm. So when Eli and I climbed the narrow stairs to the small bedroom my mother had prepared for us, the house was full. My grandmother was in the room across the hall. 2 of Eli's cousins were sleeping in the room directly below us. The walls were thin. The floors creaked. Privacy in an Amish wedding house is a kind of joke. Eli closed the door behind us. The kerosene lamp threw a warm circle of light onto the floorboards. He took off his black coat and hung it carefully on the chair. I sat down on the edge of the bed, still in my wedding dress, and I felt the entire weight of my 17 years pressing down on my chest. He sat down beside me. The bed creaked. Somewhere downstairs a man laughed. Eli reached for my hand, and his hand was warm and slightly calloused, and he said, "Hannah, are you all right?" And here is where the story turns. Here is where I'm going to tell you what I did, the thing I have carried for a long time. I started crying, not the soft kind of crying a bride is allowed to do on her wedding night, the overwhelmed, grateful tears the older women had hinted at. I cried the kind of crying that comes from somewhere very deep and very old, the kind that does not stop when you press your hands against your face. I cried so hard I could not catch my breath. And Eli, this quiet, careful young man I had married 3 hours earlier, did not pull away. He did not get angry. He did not tell me to compose myself. He sat there beside me on the edge of that creaking bed in that lamplit room, and he waited. When I could finally speak, I said the only true thing I had said in 4 months. I said I did not want this. I said it in Pennsylvania Dutch because it was the only language my grief knew. I said, I did not want to marry you. I did not want to marry anyone yet. They did not ask me, and I waited for him to be furious. I waited for him to tell my father. I waited for the consequences I had been imagining for months. If this story is moving you, if you are somewhere right now listening to a woman finally say what she could not say at 17, please subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. There are so many more stories, and I need you with me to tell them. Now, what Eli did next is the reason I am still able to talk about that night. He was quiet for a long time. The lamp flickered. The house creaked around us. Then he said, very softly, I know. He said it again. I know, Hannah. They did not ask me either. I looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time since the announcement 4 months earlier, and I saw something in his face I had never expected to see. He was tired. He was scared. He was 24 years old, and his uncle had handed him a farm and told him he needed a wife, and he had said yes to me because his parents and my parents had decided it was suitable. He had wanted to court a girl named Mary from his own district for almost 2 years, but her family had matched her with someone else first, and his uncle was getting older, and the farm needed a wife by spring, and he had done what was expected of him. He told me all of this in a low, quiet voice while the laughter drifted up from downstairs. He told me he had also cried alone in the barn the week the engagement was announced. He told me he did not know how to be a husband to a woman he barely knew. He told me he had hoped I felt differently than I did, but he had suspected, because he had watched my face during the ceremony, that I felt exactly the same. And so, on my wedding night, in that small lamp-lit bedroom, while 280 people slept around us in a house that smelled of coffee and wood smoke and the long day behind us, this is what we did. We talked. That is all. We talked until the lamp burned low. We talked about the people we had wanted to marry. We talked about our fears, his fear that he would never love me, my fear that I would never be able to love anyone after this. We talked about the farm and the children that were expected of us, and the years stretching ahead. We made a quiet agreement, an agreement no bishop would have blessed, and no parent would have understood. We agreed that we would not be intimate that night. We agreed that we would lie down side by side under the quilt my grandmother had stitched, fully clothed, with space between us. We agreed that we would try slowly to become friends first, and that if friendship grew, we would let the rest follow when it was ready, on its own time, in our own way. We agreed that the community did not need to know. We agreed that what happened inside our bedroom was ours. I lay awake for most of that night, listening to him breathe beside me, feeling the strangeness of a body in my bed that I did not know, but had promised my life to. I thought about my mother sleeping somewhere in this same house, about how she had whispered, "It will pass." I thought about the girl I had been 4 months earlier, kneading bread, and the woman I was now, married, lying beside a stranger who had also been forced into a life he had not chosen. And I felt something I did not expect. Not love. It was too early for love. Something quieter, something more like the beginning of trust. The understanding that I was not as alone as I had thought. If this story is the kind of truth you have been waiting to hear, please take 1 second right now to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so the next story finds you. The algorithm rewards videos that women actually watch all the way through, and you finishing this one matters more than you know. Let me tell you what came next. We stayed married. That is the part that surprises people the most when I tell this story. Eli and I stayed married for almost 6 years before I left the community. And during those 6 years, something grew between us that I am still not sure how to name. It was not the romance the songs describe. It was not the deep, passionate love I read about later in English novels. But it was real. We became friends. We became partners. He learned that I needed an hour alone in the garden every morning to feel like myself. I learned that he was scared of his uncle and grieving the girl he had not been allowed to marry. We talked in the evenings after the lamps were lit about things our parents had never talked about with each other. We were intimate eventually, but only when it grew between us naturally, months later, on a night that felt like ours and not the community's. My friend Rebecca, who had married the same year I did, once told me in her pantry while we were canning peaches that she still could not stand the smell of her husband's hair. Oil after 4 years. She said it the way you'd mention the weather. I held her hand for a long time without saying anything. She did not have an Eli. Most girls did not. I knew even then that what I had stumbled into was rare, and that the system had not earned it. When I finally left the community at 23, Eli was the one who drove me to the bus station in the dark. He had known for almost a year that I needed to go. We had talked about it in our bed, in our own quiet way, the way we had learned to talk on that wedding night. He cried when he hugged me goodbye. I cried too. The shunning that came afterward, the unanswered letters, the closed doors of my parents and siblings, all of that I have talked about in other videos. But Eli, in his own quiet way, never fully shunned me. A card would arrive twice a year, no return address, with my name on it in his careful handwriting. Just my name. Nothing else. He died 3 years ago of a farming accident. I learned about it from an English neighbor of his who had found my number. I cried for a week, not because I had been in love with him in the way English people mean love, but because he had been the only person in that whole world who had ever asked me how I actually felt and waited for the real answer. In therapy, I learned a phrase I had never heard before: coercive consent. It means consent that is technically given but cannot be meaningfully refused, because the cost of refusal is everything. My consent at 17 was coercive. My vows in front of those 280 people were coercive. The bed I was placed in that night was coercive. None of it would have stood up to a single honest question, and yet all of it was sanctified by my community as the will of God. What Eli and I built afterward, the friendship, the quiet agreement, The slow, careful trust. That was the part that was real. That was the part we made ourselves out of nothing, with no map and no permission. The system did not give us that. We stole it from the system, in whispers, in a lamp-lit room while the house slept. If you grew up in a place where your future was decided in conversations you were not invited to, I see you. If you ever stood in a kitchen with flour on your hands while the rest of your life was being arranged in another room, I see you. If you ever lay beside a stranger you had promised your life to and wondered if anyone would ever ask you how you really felt, I see you. You were not weak for crying. You were not faithless for wanting more. You were a young person being asked to carry something far too heavy for the age you were, and the fact that you carried it at all is its own kind of strength. I cannot give you back the years. I cannot undo the choices that were made for you, but I can tell you this, the voice inside you that whispered, I did not want this. That voice was not sin. That voice was the truest thing in the room. Listen to it now, even if you could not listen to it then. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments what part stayed with you. Tell me your story if you are ready, or just tell me you are listening. And if you want more honest truths from behind the prayer cap, please subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl, like this video, and turn on that notification bell because there is so much more I have not said yet. Until next time, remember this. The life that was chosen for you is not the only life you are allowed to want. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.